What happens when America's sweetest comedian meets one of television's most provocative hosts? And a seemingly innocent question about family values turns into the most explosive late-night moment of the year. Tonight, we're diving deep into the shocking confrontation that had Leanne Morgan walking off set, Andy Cohen scrambling for damage control, and the entire entertainment world buzzing about what really went down during that unforgettable interview. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop your thoughts in the comments, because this story gets wilder than you could ever imagine. The stage was set for what should have been a typical promotional appearance. Leanne Morgan, the Tennessee-born comedian who had been making waves with her relatable stories about motherhood and small-town life, was there to discuss her latest comedy special. Andy Cohen, ever the skilled interviewer, had prepared his usual mix of lighthearted banter and slightly edgy questions designed to create those viral moments that keep viewers coming back for more. The interview started exactly as expected. Andy welcomed Leanne with his signature charm, complimenting her recent success and asking about her journey from small-town mom to comedy sensation. Leanne responded with her typical warmth, sharing amusing anecdotes about performing at local venues and the challenge of balancing family life with a demanding tour schedule. "So Leanne," Andy began, settling back in his chair with that mischievous glint in his eye that regular viewers know all too well, "your comedy really centers around traditional family values and small-town life. Do you ever worry that your material might seem a bit outdated to younger audiences who are dealing with very different realities?" Leanne's smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her composure. "I don't think love, family, and community ever go out of style. Andy, my stories might come from a small-town perspective, but the emotions behind them are universal. Whether you're raising kids in Tennessee or New York City, you're still dealing with the same fundamental challenges of trying to keep your family together and finding joy in the everyday moments." Andy nodded thoughtfully, but there was something in his expression that suggested he wasn't quite satisfied with that answer. "But don't you think there's a responsibility, especially as someone with a growing platform, to acknowledge that not everyone fits into that traditional family structure you celebrate so often? Some might say your comedy inadvertently excludes people who are living different types of lives." The temperature in the studio seemed to shift. Leanne's posture straightened, and for the first time since the interview began, her folksy demeanor showed signs of strain. "Andy, I'm not trying to exclude anyone. I tell stories about my life, my family, my experiences. That's what comedians do. I'm not making political statements or trying to tell other people how to live. I'm just sharing what makes me laugh about my own world." "Right. But that's exactly my point," Andy pressed forward, his voice taking on that familiar edge that viewers either love or hate. "When you consistently present one type of family as the source of all your humor and joy, doesn't that implicitly suggest it's the right way? Especially when you've made comments in the past about traditional values being under attack." Leanne's eyes flashed with something that definitely wasn't her usual good-natured sparkle. "I never said traditional values are under attack. I said they're important to me and my family. There's a difference between sharing your own values and attacking other people's choices." The audience, which had been chuckling along with the earlier banter, had gone noticeably quiet. Even the production crew seemed to sense that something was shifting in the room. Andy, perhaps sensing he had struck a nerve, decided to dig deeper rather than pull back. "But Leanne, let's be honest here. You've built your entire brand around being the wholesome mom from Tennessee. You've talked about the importance of traditional marriage, traditional gender roles, traditional this and traditional that. At what point do we acknowledge that traditional often means exclusive?" That's when Leanne Morgan, the woman who had charmed audiences across America with her self-deprecating humor and gentle storytelling, showed a side of herself that nobody in that studio was prepared for. "Andy, I need you to stop right there," Leanne said, her voice carrying a steel that caught everyone off guard. The warm maternal tone that had made her famous was completely gone, replaced by something much sharper and more commanding. "You're twisting everything I've ever said into something it's not. And I won't sit here and let you paint me as some kind of judgmental person when you clearly haven't been listening to a single word I've actually said." Andy blinked, clearly taken aback by the sudden shift. This wasn't the compliant, easygoing guest he had expected. "Leanne, I'm not trying to twist anything. I'm asking legitimate questions about the impact of your messaging." "Your messaging?" Leanne repeated, her voice rising slightly. "See, that's where you're wrong, Andy. I don't have messaging. I have stories. I have experiences. I have a life that I share with people who connect with it. I'm not running for office. I'm not leading a movement. I'm telling jokes about my kids leaving their socks on the floor and my husband forgetting to take out the trash. The studio audience was dead silent now, sensing they were witnessing something far more intense than the usual celebrity interview. Even Andy's production team seemed frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this unprecedented moment play out. But those jokes come with context, Leanne, Andy insisted, seemingly unable to recognize that he was walking into increasingly dangerous territory. When you talk about traditional values and traditional families in your act, you're making a statement whether you intend to or not. And some people feel excluded by that statement. Leanne laughed, but there was no humor in it whatsoever. Some people feel excluded? Andy, do you know what excludes people? Telling them that their experiences don't matter because they don't fit someone else's idea of what's acceptable. Do you know what excludes people? Having some talk show hosts decide that your stories about loving your family somehow translate to hating other people's families. That's not what I'm saying, Andy protested, but his usual confidence was clearly shaken. Then what exactly are you saying? Leanne shot back. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're saying that because I love my traditional marriage and talk about it on stage, I am somehow responsible for making other people feel bad about their non-traditional relationships. That because I think traditional values have worth. I must think non-traditional values don't. That's not logic, Andy. That's just looking for a fight. Andy tried to regain control of the interview. I think you're misunderstanding the broader conversation here. There's a difference between celebrating your own life and presenting it as the ideal that everyone should aspire to. And when exactly did I do that? Leanne demanded. Show me one time, Andy. Just one time where I said everyone should live like me. Show me one joke, one story, one comment where I told anyone else how to run their life or their family or their relationships. The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Andy shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly realizing he couldn't provide the specific example Leanne was demanding, but unwilling to back down from the position he had taken. It's not always about explicit statements, Leanne. Sometimes it's about the overall narrative you're creating. The overall narrative I'm creating, Leanne repeated slowly, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Andy, let me tell you something about narratives. For years, I performed at tiny venues where nobody knew my name. I told stories about feeling inadequate as a mother, about struggling to keep my marriage together, about feeling like I was failing at everything that was supposed to come naturally to women like me. I made people laugh by sharing my insecurities and my mistakes and my very obvious imperfections. Her voice was getting stronger and more passionate with every word. I never once claimed to be perfect or to have all the answers or to be living some ideal life that everyone should copy. I shared my real experiences, my real struggles, and my real joys with people who saw themselves in those stories. And now you're sitting here telling me that somehow that's harmful, that my willingness to be vulnerable about my own life is creating some kind of toxic narrative. Andy, realizing he was losing ground fast, tried a different approach. But surely you understand that when someone with your platform celebrates certain lifestyle choices, it can feel like an endorsement of those choices over others. Leanne stared at him for a long moment, her expression shifting from anger to something that looked almost like pity. Andy, do you hear yourself right now? You're essentially telling me that I'm not allowed to love my own life out loud because it might make other people feel bad about theirs. Do you realize how backwards that is? I'm not saying you can't love your life, Andy replied. But his voice lacked its usual conviction. I'm saying there's a way to do it that doesn't marginalize other people's experiences. Marginalize, Leanne's voice cracked with incredul. Andy, I talk about burning dinner, forgetting school events, and having awkward conversations with my teenagers. I make jokes about my marriage being held together by duct tape and prayer. How is any of that marginalizing anyone? How is being honest about my own struggles somehow putting other people down? The cameras continued rolling as the tension in the studio reached a fever pitch. Andy's usual smooth interviewing style had completely abandoned him, and he seemed genuinely rattled by Leanne's passionate defense. Look, Leanne, I think we're talking past each other here, Andy said, attempting to regain some semblance of control. All I'm trying to say is that in today's climate, we all have to be more conscious about how our words affect different communities. Different communities, Leanne repeated, shaking her head. Andy, I perform for truck drivers and teachers, nurses and mechanics, stay-at-home moms and working dads. I perform for people who are struggling to pay their bills and keep their families together. Those are my communities. Those are the people who come to my shows because they see their own lives reflected in my stories. And now your tell weren't trying to attack my values. Leanne's voice was dangerously quiet now. The kind of quiet that anyone who has ever been in serious trouble with their mother would instantly recognize. Andy, you spent the last 15 minutes dismantling everything I stand for while hiding behind the pretense of asking innocent questions. You questioned my integrity, my impact, and my right to share my own experiences without apologizing for them. She stood up from her chair, and the movement was so sudden and decisive that several crew members instinctively stepped forward, unsure of what was happening. The microphone pack clipped to her jacket caught the studio lights as she turned to face Andy directly. You know what the real problem is here, Andy? It's not that I celebrate traditional values. It's not that I tell stories about small-town life. The real problem is that you've surrounded yourself with so many people who think exactly like you do that you've forgotten there's a whole world out there that doesn't revolve around your perspective. Andy remained seated, but his posture had changed completely. The confident, slightly smirking host who had started this interview was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely shaken by the turn this conversation had taken. Leanne, please sit down. Let's talk about this rationale. Rationally, Leanne laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. Andy, there's nothing rational about what just happened here. You invited me on your show to talk about my comedy special, and instead you decided to put me on trial for the crime of being happy with my life choices. The studio audience, which had been silent for several minutes now, was beginning to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This was clearly not the kind of entertainment they had expected when they came to watch a late-night talk show taping. I was asking legitimate questions about the cultural impact of your work, Andy insisted, but his voice lacked any of its earlier conviction. No, you weren't. Leanne shot back. You were fishing for a controversial moment that you could use to generate buzz for your show. You were hoping I would say something you could twist into a headline. You were looking for content, Andy, not conversation. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Andy opened his mouth to deny it, but something in Leanne's expression stopped him cold. Do you want to know what's really sad about this whole situation? Leanne continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. I came here excited to share my work with your audience. I thought this would be a fun conversation about comedy and family and finding joy in everyday life. Instead, you turned it into an interrogation about whether my happiness is somehow problematic. She began unhooking the microphone from her jacket, her movements deliberate and final. You know, Andy, I've spent my entire career trying to make people laugh about the challenges of real life. I've shared my failures, my insecurities, my struggles, and yes, my successes too. I've been honest about what works for me and my family, while never claiming it has to work for everyone else. The microphone pack came free, and she held it in her hand like a prop in the most important performance of her life. But apparently in your world, that kind of honesty is dangerous. Apparently being genuinely happy with traditional choices is somehow threatening to people who make different choices. Apparently celebrating your own life is only acceptable if you constantly apologize for it first. Andy finally stood up, perhaps realizing that this interview was spiraling completely out of his control. Leanne, I think you're overreacting here. These are important conversations that our society needs to have. Our society. Leanne's eyebrows shot up. Andy, you don't speak for our society. You speak for your bubble, your audience, your worldview. And that's fine, but don't pretend it's universal. She took a step toward his desk, and the cameras followed her movement. Here's what I think our society actually needs. I think we need more people who are willing to be genuinely happy without apologizing for it. I think we need more people who can celebrate their own choices without tearing down other people's choices. I think we need more people who understand that there's room in this world for all kinds of families, all kinds of values, and all kinds of stories. Her voice was building to something that everyone in the studio could feel coming. But most of all, I think we need fewer people who think that their job is to police other people's happiness and make them feel guilty for living lives that don't match some predetermined template of what's acceptable. She placed the microphone pack on Andy's desk with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any shout could have. I came here to talk about making people laugh. Andy, instead, you've reminded me why so many people feel like they can't be honest about their own lives anymore. You've reminded me why so many people feel like they have to hide who they really are and what they really believe just to avoid being attacked by people who claim to champion tolerance. The cameras captured every word, every expression, every the moment of what was clearly becoming television history. Andy stood frozen behind his desk, seemingly unable to process what was happening. "So, thank you for that reminder," Leanne continued, her voice now carrying a sadness that cut through the anger. "Thank you for showing me exactly why my comedy matters so much to the people who come to my shows. They're hungry for someone who will tell them it's okay to love their lives, even if those lives don't fit someone else's idea of what's progressive or enlightened." She turned toward the exit, then stopped and looked back at Andy one final time. "You know what, Andy? I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I hope you find a way to be happy with your own choices without needing to tear down other people's choices, because that's what genuine tolerance actually looks like." And with that, Leanne Morgan walked toward the studio exit, leaving behind the most explosive late-night television moment anyone could. As Leanne reached the studio exit, Andy's voice cut through the stunned silence like a desperate attempt to salvage his reputation. "Leanne, wait. You're walking away from an important conversation here." She stopped, her hand on the door handle, and slowly turned around. The expression on her face was one that none of the cameras had captured before during this entire confrontation. Something that looked almost like genuine disappointment mixed with resolve. "An important conversation," she repeated, walking back toward the center of the studio with measured steps. "Andy, you don't want a conversation. You want a confession. You want me to admit that my happiness somehow makes other people unhappy. You want me to apologize for loving my life." The studio audience watched absolute fascination as she positioned herself directly in front of Andy's desk. No longer the guest being interviewed, but somehow having transformed into the person in control of the entire room. "Let me tell you what an important conversation would actually sound like," Leanne said, her voice carrying to every corner of the studio. "An important conversation would be about why we've reached a point in our culture where someone can't share their joy without being accused of causing someone else's pain. An important conversation would be about why authenticity has become so threatening that we'd rather have people lie about their experiences than risk making anyone uncomfortable." Andy tried to interject, but Leanne's momentum was unstoppable. "Now, an important conversation would acknowledge that there are millions of people in this country who feel like they can't talk about their faith, their families, or their values without being labeled as bigots or dinosaurs or threats to progress. People who feel like they have to apologize for finding fulfillment in roles that don't fit the current cultural narrative." She gestured toward the audience, many of whom were nodding along with her words. "These are people who work hard, love their families, contribute to their communities, and try to live good lives according to their own understanding of what that means. And instead of celebrating that diversity of experience, we've created a culture where certain types of people feel like they have to hide who they are just to avoid being attacked." Andy's face had gone completely pale. "Leanne, that's not what I was trying to do." "Then what were you trying to do, Andy?" she demanded. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you were trying to shame me for being proud of my choices. It looks like you were trying to make me feel guilty for sharing stories that resonate with people who live lives similar to mine." The confrontation had reached a level of intensity that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable, but nobody could look away. "You talk about inclusion and tolerance, but your version of inclusion apparently doesn't include people like me. Your version of tolerance apparently doesn't tolerate people who find meaning and purpose in traditional ways of living." Leanne's voice cracked slightly with emotion. "Do you know how many women have come up to me after my shows and thanked me for making them feel like it was okay to be proud of being a mother? Do you know how many couples have told me that my jokes about marriage helped them remember why they fell in love with each other in the first place?" She wiped at her eyes, not caring that the cameras were capturing her vulnerability. These are people who had started to feel like their lives didn't matter, like their choices were somehow less valid than other people's choices, like their happiness was something to be ashamed of. And my comedy helped them remember that there's nothing wrong with loving the life you've built, even if it's not the life that gets celebrated in magazines or on social media. Andy stood there speechless, clearly unprepared for this level of raw honesty and passion. "So when you sit here and question the impact of my work, when you suggest that my celebration of traditional values is somehow harmful, you're not just attacking me, Andy. You're attacking every person who has ever found comfort or joy or validation in my stories. You're telling them that their experiences don't matter as much as other people's experiences." Leanne took a deep breath and looked directly into the camera. "I refuse to apologize for that. I refuse to apologize for making people laugh about the beautiful, messy, imperfect reality of family life. I refuse to apologize for celebrating love and commitment and the choice to put your family first. And I absolutely refuse to apologize for being happy. She turned back to Andy one final time. You want to have important conversations, Andy. Start by having an honest conversation with yourself about why someone else's happiness threatens you so much, because that says a lot more about you than it does about me. And with those words, Leanne Morgan walked out of that studio, leaving Andy Cohen standing speechless behind his desk. His audience sitting in stunned silence, and his production team scrambling to figure out how to end the most explosive interview in late-night television history. The cameras continued rolling for several more seconds, capturing Andy's shocked expression as he struggled to find words that never came. When the show finally went to commercial break, everyone in that studio knew they had just witnessed something unprecedented. A moment that would be replayed, analyzed, and debated for months to come. The interview that was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance had turned into a cultural lightning rod, exposing the deep divisions and how different Americans view family values and the right to celebrate your own choices without apology. So, what did you think about Leanne Morgan's explosive confrontation with Andy Cohen? Do you think she was right to defend her values so passionately, or did she overreact to legitimate questions about her platform? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more shocking celebrity moments that you won't see anywhere else.